What happens when a quiet Wu man faces humiliation in court by a judge who thinks she knows it all the moment her husband, none other than the state governor, steps into the room? Everything changes. What unfolds next leaves the entire courtroom speechless. The courtroom in Chester County was cloaked in an unsettling silence. Rows of worn-out wooden benches were filled with spectators, their gazes locked onto a poised woman seated at the defendant's table. Amelia Brown, dressed in an elegant blue dress that contrasted sharply with the drab surroundings, radiated calm. Her presence was understated, yet commanding. Her straight posture, assolent declaration of dignity. In front of her lay a stack of meticulously organized papers. Amelia wasn't there for herself. She was representing a small nonprofit organization dedicated to helping underprivileged families fight back against illegal evictions. Her work was thankless, her resources limited, but her resolve was unshakable. The doors to the courtroom opened with a creak in a node. Judge James Hartford, everything about the man screamed authority, his measured pace the way. Giddy sound of his polished shoes on the wooden floor, the stern set of his jaw. But there was something else, an air of superiority that hung around him like a heavy fog. His thin glasses perched on his nose added a layer of calculated severity to his face. He scanned the room and paused when his eyes landed on Amelia. There was no mistaking the look, a mix of disdain and irritation, as though her calm demeanor offended him. "Miss Brown, I assume you're representing this organization," hesked his voices listening through the room like a cold wind. His issy tone was less a questioner. "And Maury challenged." Amelia nodded gracefully and slid neatly bound packet of documents toward him. "Yes, Your Honor, we filed an appeal regarding the unlawful heir you licensed." Attorney Hartford interrupted, leaning forward slightly, his voice ripping with mockery. "Or are you just someone who thought it'd be fun to play lawyer for the day?" A murmur swept through the courtroom like a ripple in a pond. Amelia didn't flinch. She met this stare with a composed smile, her voice unwavering. "I'm not a licensed attorney, Your Honor. However, the law permits me, that's end." Oh, Hartford barked, slamming the folder shut with a loud snap. The sound echoed, punctuating his authority. "You're wasting this court's time. I'll give you 5 minutes to explain why. We shouldn't dismiss this nonsense outright." The air grew evil. The tension palpable towards was a stark reminder to everyone presenting this courtroom as word was law. But if he was expecting Amelia to shrink under the weight of his scrutiny, he was sorely mistaken. Amelia rose from her seat, adjusting her papers with quiet determination. Her voice was steady as she laid out Luther case describing how families were being wrongfully evicted their lives, so pending by landlords who skirted the law. Her words were thoughtful, precise, and deeply compassionate, but Hartford barely listened. Instead, he interrupted, frequently releasing his remarks with a thin veil of disdain. "What do you expect me to believe? His victims didn't know how to pay their rent in time." He sneered, leaning back in his chair. "Amelia, your bait pressing one of the victims' hands as if he had not been off." Of course, Hartford interrupted him and rolled his eyes. His voice was thick with sarcasm. "Next, you'll be telling me that All Saints perhaps would like to take a seat and run this court yourself." The spectators in the courtroom gasped softly, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Hartford's words had crossed a line. None dared to call out the man who had the power and insufficiency. Anyone in his courtroom would be better than to challenge him. Amelia, however, stayed slightly, her voice didn't falter. She continued, presenting her case, here every word a quiet act of defiance against Hartford's derision. By the time her 5 minutes were up, the room was thick with unspoken tension. Hartford made a theatrical show of gathering his papers, his expression on of aggravated boredom. "Well, Miss Brown, I've heard your argument, and I must say it's about as compelling as a wet newspaper. I'll make my decision tomorrow." Amelia sat down, her expression calm, but her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Around her, the room buzzed with whispered conversations. The contrast was stark. Hartford's blustering arrogance against Amelia's quiet dignity, and yet beneath her calm exterior a storm was brewing. The courtroom was buzzing the next morning, its benches packed wall to all word about yesterday's showdown between Judge Hartford and Amelia Brown had spread like wildfire, drawing spectators from every corner of Chester County. Everyone wanted to see the next act of what felt more like a spectacle than atrial. The anticipation was electric, the tension suffocating. You could almost taste it. Judge Hartford entered with a smug grin that didn't bother to hide his enjoyment of the growing attention for him. This wasn't just another case, it was a stage, and like any seasoned performer, he knew how to play to his audience. Taking his seat, Hartford adjusted his glasses with deliberate precision, letting his gaze linger, and Amelia sat quietly at the defendant's table, her blue dress swapped for a sharp gray suit. Her calm, unshakable demeanor seemed to irk Hartford even more today. "Miss Brown," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "are you absolutely sure you understand what you're saying? Or is this just your attempt to attract some attention to yourself? Maybe even make headlines?" There were soft gasps and muffles from the audience. Hartford's words cut like a blade designed to belittle and provoke. Amelia met his gaze evenly. Her voice was steady. Her too. Me measured, Your Honor, all the evidence is clearly presented in the documents before you if you take the time to review them enough. Hartford cut her off with the sharpness of a gavel strike, his voice reverberating across the room. I don't have the time or the patience to indulge in someone's fantasies. This court has more important matters to address without even glancing at the documents. Amelia had painstakingly prepared. He leaned back in his chair, a look of triumphant finality on his face. The appeal is denied, he declared, his tone as dismissive as his words. The decision landed like a hammer blow, silencing the room. Amelia remained still here, expression unreadable. Slowly, methodically, she began gathering her papers. Her movements were deliberate, almost meditative, as if each action was a silent act of defiance. Thank you for your time, she said quietly, her voice firm but without an ounce of sarcasm. Then, rising to her feet, she nodded to the court staff and walked out with the same calm dignity she carried since the start. Behind her, whispers filled the room. Spectators leaned toward one another, exchanging wide-eyed looks and hushed comments. Some admired her poise, while others shook their heads, muttering about how naive she was to think she could. In against Hartford, outside the courthouse, a local journalist, caught up with her microphone in hand, has stepped into her path, his expression a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Miss Brown, can I ask, how do you stay so composed when someone like Judge Hartford openly humiliates you like that? Amelia paused, her lips curving into a faint knowing smile. I believe in justice, she replied simply, even when it feels far away. The journalist blinked, caught off guard by her unwavering calm, before he could press further. Amelia was gone, her figure disappearing into the crowd with the same quiet grace that had defined her presence in court. Meanwhile, Judge Hartford was holding paper, his tone as dismissive as several people like her. He said, leaning back in his leather chair, don't understand how the real world works. They think the law is some kind of toy they can bend to their ideals. But this isn't a charity. This is my courtroom. His words, dripping with arrogance, were published the next day and quickly went viral. Social media lit up with debates. On one side, Hartford's supporters labeled Amelia out of her depth, dismissing her as an idealist with no grasp of reality. On the other, her defenders called out Hartford's blatant disrespect and abuse of power. Comments flooded in from across the spectrum. Finally, a judge with the backbone to stand up to nonsense. One user wrote, this man's arrogance is why people lose faith in the system. Countered another, but while the arguments raged on, new note of Hartford had any idea of the storm that was about to break a few days later. The courtroom was buzzing once again. The benches were packed with curious onlookers, the air thick with anticipation. And there she was, Amelia Brown, sitting quietly in the back row, her presence understated, sever her calm demeanor didn't waver, but her very existence seemed to ignite a fire. In Judge Hartford, his sharp eyes darted toward her more than once, irritation bubbling beneath his carefully composed facade. The session began like any other. Hartford cleared his throat and called the court to order, his gavel striking with its usual self-important force. He launched into his opening remarks, but his words hung in the air. As the courtroom doors creaked open, the sound of shoes echoed through the room. Head turned as a tall man in a tailored navy suit walked in. The air shifted instantly. This wasn't just anyone, it was Governor Thomas Wilkins. His presence commanded the room. Without saying a word, conversations stopped, whispers faded, and even the court stenographer froze, her finger shovering above the keys. Hartford, clearly startled, rose halfway from his seat, fumbling to regain control of the room. Governor Wilkins, what an unexpected honor. The governor raised a hand, cutting him off with a calm yet authoritative gesture. I'm used to the governor, he said, his voice is steady but laced with a weight that silenced Hartford. Mid-sentence, I'm here as the husband of the woman you publicly humiliated. The word shit the courtroom like thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the crowd. All eyes darted to Amelia, who stood gracefully, her quiet composure still intact. She walked forward, joining her husband at the front of the room. You asked who I was, Your Honor, she said, her voice is steady and unyielding. Now, you know. Hartford's face turned crimson, the self-assured mask he wore cracking under the weight of the revelation. He stumbled over his words, attempting a half-hearted apology. Mrs. Wilkins, ew. Had no idea. The governor's gaze was piercing, cutting through Hartford's flustered excuses like a blade. You didn't care to know. Has said you saw whereas less than you a distraction, an inconvenience. But let me remind you, Judge Hartford, that the law you so proudly wield is meant to serve justice, not your reg. The room was utterly still. Hartford's ardent supporters couldn't hide their discomfort. The cameras in the back of the courtroom were rolling, capturing every word, every expression, every shift in power. Amelia turned to face the judge. Here ya is calm, but unrelenting. Perhaps this is an opportunity, Your Honor, she said, her voice is steady, a chance for you to reconsider how you treat the people who come into your courtroom. Hartford opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come, the weight of his actions amplified if by the presence of the governor and the quiet dignity of Amelia rendered him speechless. By the time the session ended, Hartford's career was effectively over within hours. The video of the courtroom scene flooded social media, sparking outrage across the country. Headlines screamed for a counterbuy. Liddy judge exposed governor defend wife against public humiliation. The court system launched an immediate investigation, and Hartford was suspended from the bench pending. But it wasn't just Hartford downfall that people talked about. Amelia Brown became a symbol of grace under fire. Her unwavering composure and quiet determination resonated far beyond the courtroom, inspiring countless others to stand up for justice in the face of adversity. As Amelia and Governor Wilkins left the courthouse that day, she paused for a moment, glancing back at the building. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Her faint, knowing smiles spoke volumes. This wasn't just a victory for her. It was a victory for everyone who'd ever been silenced, dismissed, or underestimated. In the end, it wasn't Hartford's gavel that carried the weight of justice. It was Amelia's